How the f did yet another maker of utterly uninspiring wheels such as this manage to snag one of Britain's top icons for pennies? Well, first, let me tell you a short story about a few men's monumental hubris. Now, I debated long and hard on if I should make this, to be honest with you. I normally wouldn't, but this is such a special and important event that I just had to. So here's my hot take. First, we're going to talk about briefly, or as briefly as I can, about how we got here and the parties responsible for this. Next, we're going to talk about the victims of this whole debacle. And once they've calmed down, hopefully, we'll get into the way forward and what TVS have gotten themselves into. Grab a seat and a stiff drink. Now, for many, the Norton name doesn't need any further explanation. Its heritage is completely undeniable. They've been around since the 1900s in one form or another. They made military motorcycles during both world wars. Their racing heritage is written in stone. They've won the Isle of Man TT for 8 years on the trot once. They set a speed record. It made a Wankel engine motorcycles, for God's sakes, and the list goes on. But to me, on top of it all, it is also a cursed brand. Its history is also mired with fraudsters, conmen, and the British taxpayer consistently being shafted. It has also seen at its helm more knobs than the public toilet seat. From AMC to financiers looking for a quick buck and going through the NVT saga. Now, folding and changing hands often isn't uncommon in such a difficult industry. All you have to do is look at Triumph or MV Agusta or even Aprilia. All these and more rose from the ashes, but despite all of Norton's history, it never really found commercial success. Then owner of dormant Norton, American banker Oliver Kermer succeeded in 2008 in consolidating the global rights, which were then scattered around the world, being owned by a Canadian entrepreneur with links to organised crime, a Chinese trademark Troll, and Norton's German distributor Joy Seifert. Now, Oliver previously tried to flip Norton to MV Agusta, but the deal fell through once a major shareholder at MV vetoed it. So Oliver was stuck with Norton during a financial meltdown and was itchy to pass it on, even to a clothing company, if it came to it, who had no plans of making bikes at all. Now, late in 2008, in comes Stuart Gardner and he makes him an offer. He made a fortune importing fireworks from China and selling them in the UK. He decides to take a punt at selling motorcycles. You'd think that maybe by then Stuart was a straight shooter that only got roughed up by life, but you'd be wrong. Knowingly or not, it turns out he used the proceeds of a tax fraud as a loan to pay £1 million to acquire the Norton brand off of Oliver. Not off to a good start, if I say so myself. Now, some of the articles on Stuart from back then, or even in recent years, praising him like a poster child of British entrepreneurs, have aged like decade-old milk. Stuart's own quotes are comical with today's perspective. Making a motorcycle business earn money didn't seem to be a very complex problem, and I think the simplicity of my approach made it successful. My approach was just press the make button, boys. I gave them the problem of making the bikes, and by not getting bogged down by the detail, I was able to concentrate on the rest of the business. Business is simple, really. Buy the product at £1, sell it for £2, and make sure you operate for less than £1. Yes, Stuart, you bet. The jokes write themselves. No matter, Stuart buys the brand with no bikes, no factory, just the rights and a few CDs containing drawings. Honestly, despite it all, I really admire the balls on the guy. Now, this of course gets the British government absolutely wet at the idea of a British icon being resurrected, and they put their weight behind the brand, clearly with minimal due diligence. This buys Stuart access to the highest spheres of British society, politics and show business. 2012 is when the second red flag is raised, as over 228 pensioners were duped by a conman into transferring over £40 million of their pension funds into 3 Norton-owned pension schemes: the Commando 2012, the Dominator 2012 and the Donington MC. Many were left with hefty tax bills from HMRC after being promised a tax-free lump sum. The sole trustee of this scheme? Stuart Gardner. The administrators registering the scheme with HMRC, T12 administration owned by one Andrew Meeson and one Peter Bradley, the same convicted Andrew and Peter who provided the initial loan from tax fraud to allow Stuart to buy Norton. You could not make this shit up. Stuart pleads ignorance, plays the victim card, and life goes on. By 2015, Norton had received more than £5 million of taxpayer support. In July 2015, then Chancellor George Osborne announced a grant of £4 million from BEIS. A year later, a further £2.1 million is granted to Norton from Innovate UK under BEIS oversight. In November 2019, the Midlands Engine Investment Fund, also under BEIS jurisdiction, signed off to provide a 1.5 million loan. And all this raises two simple questions really. Why was so much taxpayer money thrown at a company with obvious signs of distress and mired in fraud? And second, where is all the damn money now? Now at this stage, commercially speaking, Norton was promising the moon. They announced IOM-TT racing, V4 models, the Atlas models and the plethora of special edition 961s, when it was common knowledge that existing orders were not being delivered, perhaps not even being built. Norton were grabbing deposits but producing very little, and what they do produce inevitably returns to the factory for repair work. Tales of customers waiting for their bikes for years, or tales of bits being taken off from customer bikes in for warranty work and being fitted to production line bikes are not uncommon. Money from grants and loans etc. kept disappearing, and it sure as hell didn't end up being put in the bikes. In fact, Stuart didn't even make it difficult to become suspicious, as he's seen living a lavish lifestyle or saddling Norton with the debt of a fleet of Aston Martins, while the company has a gaping cash flow problem. It gets so bad to the point of a crowdfunding campaign by Norton is launched to attempt to shore up the company's finances. Garner said, "We are giving the people who understand Norton and motorcycles an opportunity to get involved. People can spend as little as £50 for a small stake in Norton." Here's the kicker. Having spoken to the big bankers, they just don't get it. And this should have been the big red flag. Banks which conduct proper due diligence didn't want to touch Norton with a 10-foot pole. No matter, 5,000 small investors registered their interest, but the arrival of a single investor who promised a full amount saw the campaign closed, only for the anonymous investor to withdraw the offer. Talk about bad luck. From then on, things unraveled pretty damn quickly. In January 2020, Norton pissed off the only institution you should never fuck with, the taxman. HMRC took Norton to court over unpaid taxes to the tune of some £600,000. By the end of the month, the firm enters administration. I told you, it goes downhill really quickly. Metrobank, the single biggest secured creditor, had had enough. They appoint BDO as admins to try and figure out why the firm was a money colander, what it was worth, and how they were going to recoup their losses. By the end of March, they put out a situation report I read with a gaping mouth. It was sobering. Grab some whiskey, you'll need it. Now, usually how it works is, at the front of the line are secured creditors. These are people given collateralized loan. If you fail to pay them back, they take your collateral. Now, as per the BDO report of Norton, Metrobanks are the only secured creditor. Norton refinanced from Santander Bank to Metrobank in June 2019, and I bet now Santander is thanking their lucky star. Metrobank are owed two amounts of money, one from Norton and one from Donington Hall Estates, which is Norton's HQ and factory, and also under steward directorship. Because why have one bankrupt company when you can have two or three? Norton owes Metrobank some £4 million, not including interest and charges, and Donington Hall Estates owes some £3 million to Metro, not including interest and charges. Next in line are the preferential creditors, typically the staff from a bus company. Each is eligible to claim for wage arrears, capped at £800 per person, which I think is a bit of a joke. Now, due to resignation, the number of employees stands around 58 now, so that's a debt of around £46,000. Now, close to the back of the line sit unsecured creditors, which typically will have lent the business but without collateral in return for a higher interest rate. If anything is left after the secured and preferential creditors have eaten, they get to claim the scraps. In our case, these would be contractors, customers and HMRC. Now, as per the incomplete Norton books, BDO has seen some £6.2 million, but actually received claims from creditors totaling £7.2 million. Norton must have employed a monkey as accountant, but are we even surprised by that at this stage? It is worth noting that of that 7.2 million figure, which we'll go with, £3.3 million belongs to customers who have put in deposits, sometimes in full, for motorcycles they'll never get or even see. The money raised was never ring-fenced, so nothing is traceable. The monkey accountant theory might not be a joke after all. And this is exactly what pisses me off about the whole thing. Norton had people willing to pay massive deposits, sometimes full prices in advance to the tune of 40 grand. It had a cult following some brands could only dream of. People willing to pardon the shoddy reliability and interminable wait yet they were still let down by shoddy management of the company. At last, at the back of the line sit the shareholders, patiently waiting for all the loans to be paid back to pick what's left, usually nothing at all. In our story, we're talking about all the missold pension holders who had their pension funds invested into Norton motorcycles by Stuart Garner in his capacity as trustee, and that is 228 pension funds that total a ridiculous amount of millions. Now then, what about the people who owe the company money? Well, at the time of the BDO report, Norton is owed some £860,000, the majority of which is relating to licensing agreements, which I'll assume are the 961 engine rights bought by Jin Lang. However, the report mentions recovery of that money is uncertain. And Norton will need that money because there isn't much cash in the bank. A Santander account shows 15 grand and $211,000 was in the Metrobank account, which you can be sure they'll be holding on to. Well, at this point, you must be wondering, well, Norton is a bike company, so most of their assets will be in bikes, surely. Well, yes and no. Norton's book was showing some 69 bikes in its possession, which, while it's laughably low, it's not too bad. But it obviously gets worse. BDO uncovered that of the 70 they identified, only around 27 actually belonged to Norton, with half that amount not even finished. The rest are either customer bikes in for servicing or warranty work, or bikes already sold. Now at this stage, even Stuart's t-shirt was whistleblowing. Yes, it is unapproachable. Who else will need to be paid eventually? Well, it's safe to assume that Metro's overdraft facility is not a charity. The meter is currently showing £550,000, and it will most definitely continue to rise. But one of the biggest tabs will be BDO's own, who had to untangle this whole mess and pay their own contractors for the forensic work, the due diligence work, and all the rest of it. And that's currently estimated at £1.2 million. Finally, BDO say they had 331 expressions of interest in buying the business, but once they had a look at the company's finances behind closed doors and realized what they were getting into, the number narrowed down to 8 who were progressed to phase 2, where additional info is provided, as well as site visits. Rumours were everywhere about who would buy it, till the night of the 17th of April, TVS of India emerged as the buyer for £16 million in cash. And the first question I ask myself is it a good deal? Well, using some back of the envelope math, and if you kept track of all the numbers earlier, you'll know that the company has £16 million in debt. Now, offsetting this against £1.36 million comprised of cash at hand, bikes owned, and money owed to Norton, assuming it's recoverable, this will give you a net figure of £14.64 million worth of net debt. So I can tell that TVS paid in cash £1.36 million for the rights to the Norton brand and its heritage, valued at over £5 million in book value at least, and already, albeit barely, functioning operation with employees and premises already there, and finally a pretty full order book that's just begging to be filled. Now under that light, I'm sure you agree this seems like the deal of the century for TVS. £16 million is a pittance to TVS. They're the third largest manufacturer of motorcycles in India with revenues in the billions. The acquisition will also unlock strong synergies between the brands, and TVS can leverage its global reach and supply chain capabilities to propel Norton's growth. Do I wish it was time for Royal Enfield? You bet. Would I prefer it was Timur Sadrov, CEO of MV Agusta, and create a sort of Italo-British alliance dominating the luxury class of motorcycles? That's the stuff of my dreams. But the challenges ahead of Norton are huge, and only a giant the likes of TVS was prepared for it at the right price. So what's next for Norton? Well, the Atlas Nomad and Ranger look safe on the TVS, and that's not a bad thing. The brand needs those very badly. The V4 are a good question. Nothing's been explicitly said by TVS about them, but taking account of the fact warranty work went through the roof on them and that it's by far Norton's most toxic product, I'd just refund the customer deposits, fix the already sold ones, and lay low for a while for the shitstorm to die down. Now that would obviously be the sane move, or just replace their own V4s with Aprilia V4s and stop trying to make everything in-house and British, which is one of the things that could be signed to their demise. Now if you remember, even the Italians at Cagiva once did the right thing. They swallowed their pride and put a Japanese SV1000 lump in their Cagiva Raptors. Stuart is obviously gone. Does his right-hand man Simon Skinner get the boot as well? Well, that's another good question. He's been at Norton since the Stuart acquisition and has silently witnessed all the mismanagement going on. So part of the demise is attributable to him as well, I'm afraid. Norton will also have the gargantuan task of finding salesmen willing to sell Nortons to customers likely to kill you at the simple mention of the N-word. Regain trust of all suppliers who have been burnt previously by Norton not paying their bills. not an easy task. And finally, make sure an antivirus company doesn't steal the Norton name again. My heart goes to all the pensioners who were missold and are now in for the full ride with no guarantee they'll ever see their money again. It goes to the employees who were let go or resigned in desperation or protests at having to give the endless runaround to customers. To most of us, the British taxpayer being dragged into yet another money black hole due to incompetent politicians and just shoddy practices. Do I feel bad for Stuart? Well, while I admire his initial resolve to resurrect Norton, he just did way too many fuck-ups for me to like him. And I really tried, he's quite the charmer. Did he initially just want to flip it for a quick buck, but got ensnared in a web of actually running a motorcycle company? Maybe. Was he caught in an impossible cash balancing act? Maybe. But his decisions did not help the situation at all. Will he go hungry? I really doubt it. Will anything happen to him? Well, if banking scandals are anything to go by, I'm gonna say a firm no. But I know that a lot of people want to see blood. While I respect a lot of things he's done for Norton, I personally haven't lost 40k on a bike I'll never get. So I understand people's frustration. This whole ordeal also puts the established motorcycle press under the spotlight, at least to me. How did they miss this for a decade? Either they're accomplices in this, or they are simply and utterly incompetent. From the press to the government heralding him as an export champion and having him as the face of government advertisement campaign, very few will emerge from this with their credibility intact. With Carillion's liquidation still fresh in people's minds, the question remains, why does the British taxpayer always end up out of pocket? Similarities can easily be drawn with the 80s DeLorean and Colin Chapman debacle. For now, Norton joins the long list of British distressed assets sold for peanuts to Chinese and Indian interests. Alas, I hope they follow the Jaguar Land Rover footsteps and rise again. The customers are clearly there. The demand for their beautiful bikes is there. All that remains is hopefully Norton rising up to the occasion and making the Brits proud once again. If you like this video, you know what you need to do. Make sure you subscribe and share it with a friend. And thank you to all the people who subscribed recently. Welcome to the channel, and see you next time.